Hello, so this is the second episode of the narrative of the period 1625 to 1701, looking at the political instability of this period. So the second episode, I'm starting in 1629 and I'm going up to 1640. So this is the period of the personal rule of Charles I. So we're starting in 1629 following the dissolving of Parliament by Charles after the three resolutions. And in 1629, his personal rule gets off to a decent start. And I think this is, when we're looking at this, really the wheels come off in about 1637. I always think about 1637 being a turning point. So really up to that point, it's relatively successful. Successful in terms of he's finding ways of raising money. He's not too unpopular. There's some grumblings, but really it's about 1637 when the wheels start to come off. Anyway, we're starting in 1629, dissolve Parliament, and there's the Treaty of Susa, which is peace with France. It saves Charles money. He's not at war with France. War costs money. So it's reasonable start. 1630, we've got the Treaty of Madrid, peace with Spain. So France and Spain, both of which in the late 1620s, England had been at war with. England is now at peace with those countries, and therefore the king is saving money. It doesn't have to pay to fight those wars. So 1629, 1630, as I said, gets off to a decent start. Charles I also in 1630 issues fines for what's called distraint of knighthood. So landowners that are making money from land that haven't been knighted, and it's a kind of ancient rule. He's using this to raise money. He doesn't have Parliament, so he's using these kind of ancient rules to try and raise money without Parliament. He does some other things as well that we'll get to a little bit later, but distraint of knighthood, he's using this ancient law to try and raise money. I think they're fined £40 if they aren't knighted. In 1631, Charles I issues the Book of Orders, which is really a continuation of Elizabethan poor law. So just setting out kind of rules for justices of the peace, maintaining order in local areas. In 1632, there's the death of Sir John Eliot in the Tower of London. And Eliot had been one of the 5 knights that had refused to pay the forced loan. So Eliot becomes a kind of martyr figure for parliamentary opposition to the king. Obviously, Parliament isn't sitting, but Eliot becomes a kind of martyr figure for those people who are challenging the king, things like the forced loan. And later on, when we get the Long Parliament called, you could say that it's Eliot's death and things like this that really have driven this wedge between Charles and his opponents. Okay, so we move on to 1633. Charles I is crowned in Scotland, and this is the first time he goes to Scotland since he's become king in 1625. So some people see this as kind of, he's not really respecting Scotland. He was born in Scotland, but he's not really too bothered about Scotland. He doesn't go there until 1633. And again, this, looking in hindsight with what happens in Scotland in just a few years' time, you could say that this is, perhaps he should have gone there earlier, should have respected the Scots a little bit more. Maybe if he'd been crowned there earlier, it possibly would have given him a greater understanding, and maybe some of the issues later wouldn't have happened, but who knows. Also in 1633, a very, very important appointment. William Laud is appointed Archbishop of Canterbury. Laud is a very, very prominent Arminian. In 1628, he'd been appointed the Bishop of London. He's appointed Archbishop of Canterbury. And this period, 1633 to 1640, is the period of Laudian reform. So bringing back colour and spectacle and hierarchy to the church. So kind of this high Anglicanism, this Arminian approach to worship, which is the exact opposite to what Puritans want. Really antagonises Puritans. So Laud is appointed Archbishop of Canterbury in 1633. Also in this year, the Book of Sports is reissued. And this had been issued by James I in 1618. And it's basically rules, local rules of what can go on certain days, festivals and things. And this this is important because, again, it kind of antagonises Puritans. It says certain things can happen on Sundays. Puritans aren't happy with that. Okay, 1634, we're talking about Puritans again. William Prynne, and we're going to come back to Prynne in a few years' time, but he's sentenced, he's a prominent Puritan writer, he's sentenced for writing a book against actresses, which is a kind of veiled attack on Henrietta Maria. He's imprisoned in 1634 and he has his ears cut off. So it's the start of kind of Laudian persecution, which we'll come back to. Also in 1634, Charles is still trying to raise money. He issues a soap monopoly to a Catholic company that makes soap. This is very, very unpopular because obviously Catholicism wasn't very popular in England, and soap is something that you have to, clean your body with. It's very intimate. People aren't happy about using Catholic soap, so it's known as Popish soap, this issue in 1634. Another way Charles tries to raise money is by issuing ship money to coastal regions. Now, this is something that's normally paid by coastal regions in times of war for the upkeep of the navy. So doing this in 1634, there isn't a war, but coastal regions are kind of used to paying it. There's not a big outcry in 1634. In 1635, ship money is extended to inland counties, and this is where things start to change, I think, in 1635. As I said before, it really happens in 1637, but 1635, Charles I extends ship money to inland counties, and people start to grumble about this. They're not very happy at having to pay ship money. This isn't something that people are used to doing, and it's a way of Charles raising money without Parliament. As I said in the first episode, the role of Parliament at this point, and Charles sees the role of Parliament predominantly as a way of raising money for him. So he's looking for ways to raise money, alternative ways. Then we go on to 1637. This is the key year, the key turning point. So a few things happen here. If we start off with Puritans, so Puritan writers, Burton, Bastwick and Prynne are persecuted. They've spoken out on Laud, they've spoken out on the religious policy, and they're branded on both cheeks with S and L for seditious libeller, or it's known as the sign of Laud. They also have their ears cut off, those that still have ears. Prynne, of course, has lost his ears in 1634. So Puritans are persecuted, and what happens is people start to sympathise with the Puritans against Laud. So it's kind of this persecution, of this high-profile persecution. There's a backlash against Laud here, starting. There's also in 1637 a new prayer book issued in Scotland, and when this is read out for the first time in St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh, there's a riot. Jenny Geddes, who's a local woman, throws her chair at the minister who's reading the new prayer book, and it starts this riot in St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh, which really extends out and becomes a massive issue, which we'll talk about in just a minute. So this is against kind of Laudian reform, against Arminianism. And what Laud and the king are trying to do is standardise worship. They're trying to introduce a new religious settlement that's the same across the country, across England and Scotland. Obviously, it's not popular. People in Scotland aren't used to religion being imposed on them from above like this, and there's this huge backlash. Also in 1637, we have the trial of John Hampden, who's a Puritan MP who refused to pay ship money. Hampden eventually loses the case 7-5, but the fact that 5 judges who've been appointed by the king do vote for Hampden against the king show that the public feeling against ship money. Hampden is a Puritan MP, so politics and religion very, very much intertwined here. 1638, there's the National Covenant in Scotland. So this is a national petition that's sent all around Scotland, particularly the lowlands from Edinburgh, where people are signing up, speaking out against Laudian reform, out against the king, and promoting kind of Presbyterian church settlement. And this eventually culminates in the next year, in 1639, in the First Bishops' War, which Charles his army is completely disorganised, doesn't have money, and loses the First Bishops' War before a shot's fired, basically. at this time as well, in 1639, there's the taxpayers' strike in England because English taxpayers refuse to pay for what they see as a war against their fellow Protestants, the Scots. So you can see from 1637, as I said before, the wheels are coming off the personal rule. Charles is struggling with money. The religious policy is not working. There's increased sympathy for Puritans, and there's increasing kind of like challenges to his policies like ship money. So now we're on 1640. Wentworth, Thomas Wentworth is created the Earl of Strafford. He's a prominent Arminian, and he's created the Lord Deputy of Ireland. He becomes very, very important quite soon. In the next episode, we'll talk about him a little bit more. But that's a key advisor to the king. It's a promotion of an Arminian. He becomes kind of public enemy number one quite shortly. Charles, because of the issues with Scotland, calls Parliament in March 1640, and this is known as the Short Parliament because it only lasts 3 weeks. Parliament are not happy. They kickstart with all these voices of opposition to the king, so the king immediately just kind of like dissolves Parliament straight away. That lasts for 3 weeks. The Short Parliament, it's over kind of before it's begun. Then we've got the Second Bishops' War. Again, it kicks off with Scotland. Again, Charles's army not in a very good state, and Scotland effectively knock them out and march down to Newcastle, which is a coal, the coal industry is based in Newcastle, so very, very, important, strategically important area, and Charles is forced to signs the Treaty of Ripon with Scotland, which gives the Scots £850 a day, which in today's money is almost £100,000 a day. So £850 a day, 1640, Treaty of Ripon with the Scots to keep them in Newcastle. So it's like, stay in Newcastle, I'll give you £850 a day, don't march any further. At this point, Charles has run out of options. He has to call Parliament again. He's run out of money. He's lost the war with Scotland. The religious policy is not working. It's not popular, so he has to call Parliament. And he calls Parliament again, and this is known as the Long Parliament. And we'll start here in the next episode. Thank you for listening.